Hey guys, tonight we are running away to join the pirates. Not the clean, swashbuckling, Hollywood glam version. Of course, we're diving into the gritty, smelly, and frankly, disgusting reality of the Golden Age of Piracy. This isn't a story about finding treasure chests overflowing with gold. It's about finding weevils overflowing in your biscuit. So, tonight's journey is less about the thrill of the high seas and more about the grim reality of the pirate menu. And honestly, given what we're about to put on your plate, you might not even want to survive the first week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments below, let me know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always cool to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The life you're leaving behind isn't much to miss. It's a drab, gray existence in a crowded port town, where the cobblestones are slick with grime and the air hangs thick with the smell of coal smoke and unwashed humanity. You've spent years working for pennies, your back aching and your hands raw. It's a life of deference, of bowing to people you despise and waking up each day knowing it will be exactly the same as the last. That's why the ship bobbing in the harbor looks like a promise. From a distance, it's a silhouette of freedom. Its masts like skeletal fingers pointing to a new world. It's a chance to escape, to be the master of your own fate. You've heard the stories whispered in taverns how a pirate crew gets a vote, an equal share, a chance at riches beyond your wildest dreams. It's a far cry from life in the King's Navy, where you're more likely to feel the cat o' nine tails on your back than a coin in your pocket. As you get closer, though, another smell cuts through the familiar tang of salt and tar. It's not the smell of the sea. It's a sour, pungent, a deep and fermented funk that seems to seep from the very wood of the ship. It's the smell of a pantry that's been locked and forgotten for a decade. You see rough-looking men rolling heavy wooden barrels up the gangplank. Their faces grim. The barrels look ancient, stained and weeping a dark, greasy fluid that slicks the planks. You try to ignore the smell, telling yourself it's just the bilge or spoiled cargo from a previous voyage. The dream of freedom is too bright, too alluring to be tainted by a bad smell. You find the man you work old to find, a grizzled sailor with one eye and a web of scars on his face. He looks you up and down, sizing you up not for your strength, but for your desperation. He sees enough of it in your eyes. He spits on the deck and gestures towards a tattered piece of parchment, nailed to the mainmast, the ship's articles, the code of conduct. You can trade the words. Of course, reading and writing are luxuries for other people, but you understand the gist of it. No fighting on board, no stealing from the crew, and every man gets a vote to share. You take the offered quill, dip it in the ink pot, and make your mark of crew decks beside a dozen others. You are now officially one of them, a brother of the coast, a pirate. Historians still argue about what truly drove most men to this life. Was it the simple, dazzling lure of gold, or was it a more complex desire for a democratic life, a rebellion against the rigid, oppressive class structure of the 18th century? The answer is probably a messy combination of both, buried somewhere in the hearts of men just like you, standing on this deck. For you, it's the promise of a horizon that isn't blocked by a grimy tenement building. As the ship pulls away from the dock, you watch the shore shrink until it's just a smudge. A mix of fear and exhilaration churns in your stomach. You're leaving everything you've ever known for a life of complete uncertainty. The other men around you are laughing, sharing a bottle of cheap rum. Their voices rough, but their spirits high. You take a swig when it's passed to you, the harsh liquor burning your throat, but warming your chest. The sour smell from the hold wafts up again, a foul promise of the meals to come. But for now, you ignore it. You're for it. That's all that matters. Right. The first few days at sea are a strange mix of hard labor and bewildering new routines. You're learning to climb the rigging, your hands screaming in protest as you cling to the tarred ropes high above the churning waves. You're learning to tie knots you've never seen, to swab the decks, and to simply stay on your feet as the ship pitches and rolls in the open ocean. You start to look for the center of power, the man everyone orbits around. Naturally, you assume it's the captain. He's a large, imposing figure with a booming laugh and defined code he probably didn't pay for. He stands at the helm, spyglass in hand, charting the course and making grand pronouncements about the Spanish gold you'll soon be liberating. The crew respects him. Sure, HES the leader in battle, the strategist, but you quickly notice HES not the one they fear. The true gravity on this ship, you discover, belongs to a much quieter man. His name is whispered among the crew. The quartermaster. He's a thin, weary man with a perpetually sour expression, as if HES just bitten into a lemon. He carries no grand weapons, just a small, leather-bound book and a heavy ring of iron keys that jingle at his belt. That jingle is the most authoritative sound on the ship. When he walks by, conversations stop. Men who were lounging about suddenly find a rope to splice or a sail to mend. He is the one who distributes the rations, the tobacco, the rum. He is the keeper of the ship's dwindling wealth. The captain might steer the ship, but the quartermaster decides if you'll have the strength to sail it. This division of power is a core tenet of pirate life. A captain is elected to lead in the chase and in the fight, but all other times, the quartermaster holds sway. HES the crew's representative, also elected, tasked with ensuring fairness and order. HES the one who settles disputes, who doles out punishments for minor infractions, and most importantly, who guards the ship's provisions with an iron fist. It's a brilliant system. Really, it keeps the captain from becoming a tyrant, and it gives the crew a voice. You haven't just joined a pirate ship. You've joined a floating, armed democracy, and this sour-faced man is its chief administrator. You watch him one morning. He stands before the padlocked door to the storeroom, the place where all the food and water is kept. With a deliberate slowness, he selects a key from his ring. The lock groans open, and he disappears into the darkness. A few moments later, he emerges, handing out the day's allotment to the ship's crew. He consults his little book, making a note. Every barrel, every cask, every sack is accounted for. He is the human personification of scarcity. His every action a reminder that what you have is all you've got, and it has to last. Here's a little piece of pirate life they don't put in the adventure books. The quartermaster was often the one who led the boarding party when you captured a prize vessel. Why? Because he was the one the crew trusted most to go in, assess the loot, and ensure none of it was pocketed or hidden before it could be properly logged and shared amongst the entire crew. He was the chief auditor, a kind of high-stakes accountant with a cutlass. So, while the captain was fighting the other ship's captain, the quartermaster was already below decks, taking inventory. You see his authority in action later that day. Two men are arguing heatedly over a small patch of deck space to lay their bedrolls. Their voices rise, and for a moment, it looks like knives might be drawn. The quartermaster appears as if from nowhere. He doesn't shout. He simply stands there, his cold eyes flicking between the two men. They fall silent. He listens to each man's complaint with an impatient nod, then delivers his verdict in a low, flat voice. One man will sleep here, the other there. End of discussion. The men, who seconds before were ready for violence, simply nod and shuffle away. His word is law. Historians still debate the true nature of this pirate democracy. Was it a genuine political statement, a radical break from the tyrannies of naval and merchant ships, or was it simply the most practical way to keep a vessel full of armed, desperate men from tearing each other apart over the last barrel of water or a disputed coin? Perhaps the truth is that it was both a system born of necessity that accidentally became an ideal. As dusk settles, you watch the quartermaster make his final rounds. He checks the locks on the storeroom and the spirit room, where the precious rum is kept. He gives the heavy padlocks a final, testing tug. The jingle of his keys is the ship's unsettling lullaby. You're starting to understand. The captain might be the king of this little wooden kingdom, but the man with the keys, the man who decides what and when you eat, HES the real power behind the throne. And as your stomach crumbles with the first real pangs of sea hunger, you realize your fate is firmly in his stingy, meticulous hands. The moment you've been dreading and anticipating arrives with a clang. The ship's cook, a hulking man with a missing ear and a greasy apron, bangs a ladle against a rusted metal pot. It's the signal for the evening meal. You and the other new hands lined out, your tin plates held out. The smell wafting from the galley is not good. It's a dry, dusty sort of smell, with an undercurrent of something faintly musty, like old paper. There's no sizzle of frying meat, no comforting aroma of baking bread. There is only this. The cook, using a pair of tongs, drops a couple of objects onto your plate. They land with a hard clack, like stone. You look down. What you see are the thick, grayish-white crackers, about the size of your palm. They are perfectly square, packed with a few small holes, and look unnervingly mutiform, as if they were cut from a block of plaster. This, a veteran sailor next to you grunts, is ship's biscuit, or, as it's more commonly known, hardtack. You pick one up. It's surprisingly heavy and completely unyielding. You tap it against your tin plate, and it makes a sharp sound, like a piece of wood. You press your thumb into it, and nothing happens. It doesn't crumble, or give way in the slightest. You watch the other sailors. They don't even try to bite into it directly. That, you quickly learn, is a fool's game, a good way to lose a tooth. Instead, they do one of two things. Some of them drop the hardtack into their grog, the watered-down rum, letting it soak for a good 10 minutes until it softens into a sludge. Others take the handle of their knife or a small mallet and smash the biscuit into smaller, more manageable chunks. You decide to try the smashing technique. You place the hardtack on the deck, wrap it in a bit of cloth, and give it a solid whack with the pommel of your knife. The first hit does almost nothing. The second produces a crack. On the third, it finally breaks apart into jagged pieces. You pop a small piece into your mouth. It's like chewing on a rock. The taste is well. It's the taste of flour and water and not much else. It's bland, dry, and utterly devoid of joy. It's a foodstuff designed not for pleasure, but for pure, functional survival. This stuff is the absolute bedrock of the naval diet, for pirates and national navies alike. Hardtack, also called sea bread or pilot bread, was a marvel of food preservation for its time. It's a simple, unleavened biscuit, made from flour, water, and maybe a little salt. It was baked multiple times, sometimes 4 or more, until it was completely devoid of moisture. A properly made and stored piece of hardtack could, in theory, last for years. There are stories of barrels of it being discovered in shipwrecks decades later, still perfectly preserved. Civil War soldiers were still eating it over a century later, sometimes joking they were eating biscuits left over from the Revolutionary War. You learn the chillingly practical reason for those little holes seeking the surface. They aren't for decoration. They're called Docker holes, and they are punched into the dough before baking to help it cook evenly and prevent air pockets from forming on the inside. An air pocket could trap moisture, and moisture is the enemy. Moisture leads to mold, and mold could spoil an entire barrel. The survival of the crew depended on these biscuits being as dry and as hard as kiln-fired brick. As you sit there, methodically chewing your chunk of baked flour, a thought crosses your mind. There must be something else. Right. This is just the appetizer, the bread on the side. But then you look around. The other men are finishing their own biscuits, washing them down with grog. And that's it. The meal is over. There is no main course. This was the meal. The utter bleakness of it settles into your gut with a thud almost as heavy as the biscuit itself. The historical debate here isn't about what hardtack was, but rather how consistently bad it was. Some naval records suggest that, when fresh, it was merely bland and hard, but perfectly edible. However, the supply chain of the 18th century was long and unreliable. The biscuits you are eating could have been baked months or even years ago, stored in damp warehouses, and then loaded onto this leaky ship. So while a fresh batch might have existed somewhere, in some admiral's dream, the reality for the common sailor, and especially the pirate, was almost always a product that was already stale, verging on ancient. By the time it reached your plate, you looked down at the remaining piece of hardtack in your hand. It seems to stare back at you, a blank, flavorless harbinger of all the meals to come. You are on an adventure. You remind yourself, this is the price of freedom. But as you force down the last dry, Jackie bite, you can't help but wonder if you've made a terrible, terrible mistake. You are thousands of miles from the nearest bakery, and your teeth are already starting to ache. You've started to get used to the routine of the hardtack. You've learned the optimal soaking time in your grog long enough to soften it, but not so long it dissolves into a cloudy, unappetizing mush at the bottom of your cup. You've even had a grim contest with another sailor to see who could break a biscuit over their head first. He won, but complained of a headache for the rest of the day. You think you've made your peace with this cornerstone of your new diet. Then, one evening, you notice something new. You're about to dunk your biscuit into your tin cup when you see it. A tiny black speck, no bigger than a grain of pepper, moving slowly across the pale surface. You pause, leaning in for a closer look. It's definitely not a speck of dirt. It has legs. You flick it off, a little unnerved. Then, you see another one, emerging from one of the docker holes, and another. You flip the biscuit over. The underside is crawling with them. Dozens of tiny, black-headed maggots and small, dark beetles are wriggling in and out of the biscuit's pores. Your stomach turns. You feel a wave of nausea so strong you nearly drop your plate. The old sailor next to you, the one who explained the hardtack on your first day, glances at your face. He lets out a low chuckle. He says, with a world-weary sigh. Looks like you've met the ship's other crew. He tells you they're called weevils, flour weevils, to be exact, and they are in everything. The barrels of flour, the sacks of oats, and especially the hardtack, the biscuits, despite being baked into oblivion, are the perfect incubator for weevil eggs that were already in the flour. During the long, warm, and often damp voyage, they hatch. He then shares the standard sailor's wisdom for dealing with them. It's a piece of gallows humor that has been passed down on ships for centuries. You can't pick them all out. There are too many. And besides, throwing away an infested biscuit means throwing away your meal. And starvation is a far greater threat than a few bugs. So, you have two choices. The first is what they call the knock and tap method. You hold the biscuit over your plate or cup and tap it firmly on the edge. The vibrations encourage the adult weevils to fall out, and you can brush them away. It doesn't get rid of the larvae or the eggs, but it's something. The second method is even more grimly pragmatic. You just eat it. Extra protein, the old sailor says with a shrug, keeps your strength up. He explains that most experienced sailors prefer to eat their hardtack in the dark. It's not because they're trying to be sneaky. It's because they simply don't want to see what they're putting in their mouths. The crunch of a beetle is indistinguishable from the crunch of the biscuit itself, and what you don't know can't turn your stomach. This isn't an exaggeration or a tall tale. This was the absolute, undisputed reality for nearly every sailor of the era. They called the weevils preachers, clerks, or barnacles. Manuals for naval officers from the period gave explicit advice on how to manage weevil infestations, not how to prevent them, because prevention was seen as impossible. They recommended opening the biscuit barrels on a sunny day and covering them with a cloth. The weevils, seeking darkness, would supposedly crawl onto the underside of the cloth, which could then be shaken out over the side of the ship. A quaint idea, but one that rarely worked in practice. A truly bizarre piece of culinary history from this time is the supposed flavor of the weevils. Some accounts, likely written with a heavy dose of dark humor, claim that the weevils added a slightly nutty or peppery taste to the otherwise bland biscuit. Whether anyone actually believed this or if it was just a coping mechanism is something historians still ponder. It's hard to imagine anyone genuinely enjoying the taste. But in a world of such profound monotony, perhaps even a disgusting flavor was better than no flavor at all. You look down at the crawling biscuit in your hand. The dream of pirate freedom seems very far away at this moment. You are faced with a choice that defines your new life. Go hungry, or eat the bugs. You close your eyes, take a deep breath that does nothing to steady your nerves, and take a bite. You try not to think about the extra texture, the faint, squirming life within the food. You chew quickly and swallow, washing it down with a large gulp of grog. The old sailor gives you a small, approving nod. It's a grim initiation, a rite of passage into this world of deprivation. You have crossed a line you didn't even know existed. You have eaten your first weevils. It will not be your last, not by a long shot. After a few weeks at sea, a new smell begins to dominate the ship, overpowering even the musty scent of the weevil-infested biscuits. It's a deep, heavy, acrid odor, a stench of salt and old meat that seems to cling to the back of your throat. This is the smell of meat day, an occasion that you once might have looked forward to but now approach with a sense of profound apprehension. On these days, the quartermaster and the cook heave a massive, salt-encrusted barrel onto the deck and pry it open with a crowbar. The barrel contains the ship's primary source of protein aside from the weevils, salted meat, usually pork or beef. It has been preserved in an ungodly amount of brine. When the lid comes off, the smell hits you like a physical blow. It's a challenging aroma, to say the least. The meat inside is barely recognizable. It's a dense, grayish-brown mass, streaked with yellow fat and shimmering with a crust of salt crystals. The cook has to use a hatchet to hack off chunks of it. Your first portion is a slab of what is allegedly beef. It's heavy, slick, and has the texture of wet wood. The cook, following a time-honored ritual, drops the chunks into a net and tows them behind the ship for an hour or so. This is supposed to wash off the excess surface brine and make it slightly more palatable. It does very little. The meat is then boiled for hours in a large cauldron of seawater. By the time it's served, it has shrunk into a stringy, incredibly tough piece of gristle that still tastes overwhelmingly of salt. Trying to chew it is a workout for your jaw. It's so tough it feels like you're gnawing on a leather shoe. The flavor is one-dimensional, salt, and intense, burning saltness that makes your eyes water. And underneath the salt, there's a faint, but distinct, taste of decay, a hint of the long journey this meat has endured. You see some of the veteran sailors meticulously carving away the outer layers, which are often tinged with a suspicious greenish or black color. This is the part of the meat that has started to turn, and they discard it overboard with a grimace. This preservation technique, called corning or salt curing, was the only way to keep meat for long sea voyages. The process was simple. Pack the meat in barrels with massive quantities of salt, which draws out the water and creates an environment where most bacteria can't survive. The problem was, the quality of the meat to begin with was often poor, from old or sickly animals, and the barrels themselves were not always airtight. Seawater could seep in, or the brine solution wasn't strong enough, allowing for a slow, persistent rot to take hold over the months at sea. This led to the creation of a whole mythology around ship's meat. Sailors would joke that the pork was so old it could walk to the galley on its own, or that the beef was actually horse meat from the Battle of Waterloo. They gave it names like salt horse or old junk, the latter being a sailor's term for worn-out rope, which the meat apparently resembled in texture. One of the most curious and debated bits of pirate lore is the existence of slush funds. The story goes that the thick, greasy fat that boiled off the salt meat would be collected by the cook and stored in barrels. This slush was a valuable commodity, sold to tallow makers and chandlers in port. The money from this sale, the slush fund, was then supposedly used by the cook or the quartermaster to buy small luxuries for the crew, while the term slush fund definitely entered the language. Historians are still arguing whether this was a common, formalized practice or just a rare, informal perk on a few lucky ships. You watch as a ship's carpenter, a man who seems to have a solution for everything, takes his portion of the salted pork. He doesn't even try to eat it. Instead, he begins to carve it with his sharp knife. He slowly and patiently whittles the dense, hard meat into the shape of a small bird. He works on it for hours, and by evening, he has a collection of tiny, greasy sculptures, buttons, dice, even a miniature bow. The meat, it turns out, is sometimes more useful as a crafting material than as a food source. You finally give up on chewing your piece and, like you did with the hardtack, you drop it into your grog. It sinks to the bottom, slowly releasing a greasy chignon to the surface of your drink. You sip the rum, which now has a faint, savory, and not entirely pleasant undertone. This is your life now. Your bread is infested with bugs, and your meat is a salty, semi-petrified substance that doubles as a modeling clay. You look out at the endless blue ocean. The horizon has never seemed so vast, and the possibility of a decent meal has never seemed so remote. The single most valuable commodity on the ship isn't gold or gunpowder. It's fresh water, and you are almost never allowed to drink it. In your first week, driven by a thirst you couldn't shake, you made the mistake of trying to ladle some water from one of the large, sealed casks on deck. The quartermaster seemed to materialize out of thin air, his hand gripping your wrist with surprising strength. His cold eyes told you everything you needed to know. That water, he explained in a low, dangerous voice, was for cooking only, and even that was a luxury. The water stored in those barrels is a ticking clock. It's a breeding ground for algae, bacteria, and all sorts of microscopic life that you can't see but will definitely feel later. After just a few weeks at sea, the water turns foul. It becomes slimy, develops a greenish tint, and smells like a swamp. Drinking it straight is a surefire way to get a debilitating case of dysentery, a fate that could lay you out in your bunk for days, or even kill you. So, the precious, clean water is guarded more jealously than any treasure. Your daily ration of liquid comes in a different form. Drug, every day, usually in the late afternoon. The crew lines up for the call of up spirits. The quartermaster, standing guard, unlocks the spirit room. A sailor he appoints, the rum bosun, doles out each man's share. But it's not pure rum. You watch as he mixes it in a large tub, or grog tub. He pours in 1 part rum and then adds 3 or 4 parts of that slimy, foul-smelling water from the barrels. The result is grog. The invention of grog is credited to a British vice admiral named Edward Vernon in 1740. He was nicknamed Old Grog because of the waterproof jarrogram cloak he habitually wore. He ordered the sailors' daily rum ration to be diluted with water to reduce drunkenness and keep the men more capable. The practice quickly spread throughout the naval world, including 2 pirate ships, for a very simple, practical reason. It forced the men to consume the tainted water. But the alcohol in the rum was just enough to kill some of the most dangerous bacteria, making it safer to drink. It also, quite critically, masked the foul taste and smell of the water. Your first taste of grog is a strange experience. It's sour, slightly sweet, and still carries a hint of that swampy water flavor. But the warmth of the rum spreads through your chest, and for a moment, the hardships of the day seem to fade a little. It's a dulling agent, a social lubricant, and a public health measure all in one. Sometimes, if the quartermaster is feeling generous, or if the crew has performed well, a little lime juice or brown sugar might be added to the mix. This makes it almost pleasant, a concoction they call to water grog. A truly weird and wonderful fact of life at sea was the purser's measure. Pursers, the supply officers on naval ships, were notorious for enriching themselves at the crew's expense. They would often use measures for doling out rum that were slightly smaller than regulation size, a practice called pinching. To combat this, sailors would demand that the rum be proved. They'd mix a small amount of the rum with gunpowder and try to light it. If the rum was at the proper strength, at least 57% alcohol, the gunpowder would ignite. This was proof rum. If it was too watered down, it would fail the test. While pirates didn't have a purser, the principle remained. A crew of suspicious men would always be on the lookout to ensure their rum ration wasn't being unfairly diluted. You quickly learn that your daily grog ration is a lifeline. It's hydration, medicine, and morale booster rolled into one. You start to look forward to that time of day, the brief respite it offers from the monotony and the gnawing hunger. The warm buzz in your head makes the hardtack seem less hard, the salted meat less salty, and the endless horizon less intimidating. But there's a dark side. You see men who rely on it too much, who say their rations are trade food for an extra cup. Their hands tremble in the morning, their eyes are bloodshot, and their tempers are short. Alcoholism is a constant threat on a ship where there is little else to do. The line between a necessary daily ritual and a crippling dependency is perilously thin. Historians still debate the overall effect of the daily rum ration. Did it truly prevent more deaths by sanitizing the water? Or did the long-term effects of chronic alcohol consumption and the occasional drunken accident cancel out its benefits? It's a grim cost-benefit analysis that was played out on every ship that sailed the high seas. Tonight, as you drink your grog, you hold the cup in both hands, savoring the warmth. You look into the cloudy liquid. It's a cocktail of survival. Foul water, made safe by harsh liquor. It's the perfect drink for this life. You've chosen a life that's potent, dangerous, and more than a little bit tainted. The man in charge of turning your miserable ingredients into a miserable meal is the sea cook. Forget any image you have of a jolly, round ship. The cook on this pirate ship is a man forged by necessity, not passion. He is usually one of the roughest members of the crew, a man who might have lost a leg or an eye at a previous fight, rendering him less useful for climbing rigging or manning a cannon. The galley, a small, smoky, and perpetually greasy corner of the ship, is his domain. His title is a bit of a joke. He does less cooking and more rehydrating and boiling. You get a good look at him one afternoon. His name, Yuri told, is Peg-Leg Pete, a name as uninspired as his cuisine. He has a wooden leg, as advertised, and a face that looks like a crumpled map. His primary tools are a large, stained cutting board and a heavy meat cleaver that he seems to be as comfortable with as a pen. He moves with a surprising agility in the cramped space, bracing himself against the roll of the ship. His authority in the galley is absolute. You see a new sailor try to sneak a piece of biscuit before the meal is served, and Pete wordlessly brandishes the cleaver. The sailor backs away very, very quickly. The cook's job is one of the most thankless on the ship. He works in a space that is dangerously hot, filled with smoke from the brick and iron stove, and constantly in motion. A sudden lurch of the ship could send a pot of boiling water flying, a serious and oft unfatal hazard. He has to work with the worst ingredients imaginable: the weevil-filled hardtack, the rock salt beef, the slimy water. No amount of culinary skill could turn this into a feast. His job is simply to make it edible, or at least, to change its state from raw and disgusting to cooked and disgusting. His signature dish, if you could call it that, is a stew of sorts. He starts by smashing the hardtack into powder with a mallet. He hacks off chunks of the salted meat and boils them for an eternity. Then, he combines it all in a massive cauldron, adding water until it forms a thick, gray paste. This concoction is then ladled out to the crew. It has no discernible flavor beyond salt and a vague, meaty essence, but it's hot and it fills your stomach. It is the culinary equivalent of a sigh, one of the strangest, and frankly most disgusting, things you learn about the sea cook is his role as the ship's unofficial surgeon. In the chaos of battle, with men suffering from musket ball wounds or deep cuts from a cutlass, there isn't always a dedicated surgeon on board a pirate vessel. The cook, being the man with the sharpest knives and the strongest stomach for butchery, was often called upon to perform crude amputations. The same cleaver he used to hack at the salt pork might be used to sever a mangled limb. The same hot pitch he used to seal the galley stove might be used to cauterize the wound. It's a horrifying thought that the man who feeds you is also the one who might have to cut off your leg. This dual role is a point of some contention among naval historians. While it certainly happened, especially on pirate ships that couldn't afford a proper surgeon, some argue it was more of a last-ditch emergency measure than a common practice. You also discover the cook's secret weapon, the slush barrel. This is where he collects all the fat that boils off the salted meat. It's a rancid, greasy treasure trove. He uses this slush for everything. He greases pans with it. He seals cracks with it. And sometimes, if he's feeling particularly inventive, he'll mix it with a bit of flour to create a sort of fried dough ball they call a doughboy. It tastes so salt and old-fat, but the crispy texture is a welcome change from the usual mush. Life for the sea cook was uniquely perilous. On a naval vessel, the cook was a warrant officer with a certain degree of protection. On a pirate ship, he was just another member of the crew. And a crew that is perpetually hungry and dissatisfied with its food is a dangerous thing. There are accounts of crews mutinying or punishing a cook they felt was being wasteful or unfair with the rations. A cook who was seen to be hiding the best bits for himself or his friends was playing a very dangerous game. Watching Pete work, you feel a grudging respect for him. He's not a chef, he's a survivalist. He stands in his smoky hill kitchen, turning inedible materials into fuel for the human machine. He is the alchemist of the damned, turning leaden ingredients not into gold, but into something just barely capable of sustaining life. He bangs his ladle again, signaling the meal is ready. You take your place in line, hold out your tin plate, and prepare for another serving of hot, gray despair. You thank him, and he just grunts in reply, his eyes already on the next man in line. There's no joy in his work, only the grim satisfaction of another day survived. The sun rises. You work. The sun sets. You eat your grim meal, and you sleep, and then you do it all over again. The initial shock of the terrible food is faded, replaced by a dull, grinding acceptance. It's the monotony that starts to wear you down, a soul-crushing sameness that seeps into your bones. Every day, the menu is a variation of the same two themes. Hardtack and salted meat. Sometimes you get the hardtack mashed and boiled into a mush. Sometimes the meat is chopped fine and mixed in, but the taste is always the same. Salt, flour, weevils, rinsed fat. Your world has shrunk to the confines of this wooden ship, and your diet reflects that. There are no seasons here, no harvest festivals, no fresh fruit from a street vendor. There is only the slow, steady depletion of the barrels in the hole. You start to crave things with an intensity that surprises you. You have vivid dreams about a crisp apple, the crunch of a fresh carrot, or a simple piece of bread that doesn't fight back when you bite it. You wake up with the ghost of these flavors on your tongue, a cruel reminder of the world you left behind. The conversations among the crew often revolve around food. Men who have sailed to the East Indies describe spices you've never heard of, painting pictures with words of curries and exotic fruits. Others, who have raided Spanish towns, speak of sweet wines, soft cheeses, and roasted pigs. These stories are a form of torture and a form of escape. For a few minutes, you can almost taste these phantom feasts. Then the cook bangs his ladle, and you're brought crashing back to reality with a plate of gray slush. This psychological toll of a monotonous diet is a factor that history books often overlook. They talk about calories and nutrients, but they miss the simple, human element of pleasure. Food is meant to be more than fuel. It's culture, it's comfort, it's community. On this ship, food has been stripped of all of that. It is a grim, functional necessity, and the lack of variety, the lack of simple enjoyment, creates a low-level depression that hangs over the crew like a permanent fog. You see it in the men's eyes. A dullness, a lack of sport. The initial thrill of the pirate life has been sanded down by the relentless grit of the daily meal. Neighbors or side effect of this diet is the state of your digestion. The combination of hard, dry biscuits and salty, tough meat is a nightmare for your gut. You and everyone else on board are in a constant state of digestive distress, oscillating between constipation that lasts for days and sudden, urgent trips to the ship's crew toilet, which is just a seat or a net hanging over the side of the ship. There is no privacy and no comfort. One of the few breaks in the monotony is when a flying fish lands on the deck. It's a rare and celebrated event. A cheer goes up, and the lucky sailor who grabs it first usually shares it with his mates. The fish is quickly scaled, gutted, and fried by the cook in a bit of slush. The taste of fresh, flaky fish is so exquisite, so profoundly different from your normal diet, that it's almost a religious experience. For that one meal, morale on the ship soars. Men laugh, they tell jokes, they seem like their old selves again. Then it's over, and the next day, it's back to the hardtack. Historians often focus on the dramatic moments of a pirate's life, the battles, the storms, the maroonings, but they sometimes fail to capture the sheer, mind-numbing boredom that define the long stretches in between. The days and weeks of seeing nothing but blue water and blue sky, with nothing to do but mend sails, scrub decks, and eat the same terrible food. This boredom was a powerful and dangerous force. It bred tension, resentment, and a desperate craving for action. Some scholars argue that this crushing monotony was a primary driver for the pirates' aggressive, risk-taking behavior. A battle, even a deadly one, was preferable to another month of staring at the horizon and chewing on salted beef. You mark the passage of time by scratching lines into a wooden beam above your hammock. You've been at sea for 2 months now. That's roughly 60 meals of hardtack, 60 servings of salt horse, 60 nights of dreaming of food you can't have. The routine is no longer a routine. It's a prison sentence. Your body is getting weaker, but it's your spirit that feels like it's starving. You stare out at the waves, and you no longer see a path to freedom. You see a vast, empty table, stretching all the way to the edge of the world. It starts subtly. At first, you think it's just the general exhaustion that comes with this life. You feel a deep, persistent weariness in your bones that no amount of sleep can fix. Your muscles ache, not with the satisfying soreness of a day's hard work, but with a dull, heavy throat. You dismiss it as part of the life, the cost of being a pirate. But then you notice other things. You're pulling on a rope one morning, and a small cut on your hand from a few weeks ago, one you'd completely forgotten about, breaks open again. It doesn't bleed much, just a sluggish welling of dark blood, and it refuses to heal properly. It scabs over, but the slightest bump knocks the scab off, revealing angry, raw skin underneath. Old scars you've had for years start to ache and take on a strange, purplish hue. You feel irritable, your temper shorter than usual, and a profound sense of melancholy settles over you, a sadness that has no specific cause and no obvious cure. The first truly alarming sign appears in your mouth. You're chewing on your morning hardtacks often in grog. As is your ritual, and you feel a strange sponginess in your gums. Later, you look at them in a small, cracked piece of mirror you own. They look swollen and have a strange, dark, bluish-red color. When you press on them with your finger, a little bit of blood oozes out. Your teeth feel loose. Not dramatically so, but you can feel a tiny, unnerving wiggle in your front incisors. You try to talk about it with one of the other new hands, but he just shrugs, showing you his own bleeding gums. It's just something that happens at sea, he says. It's normal, but the veteran sailors know better. You see them looking at you, at the other men who are starting to show the same symptoms. You see a flicker of pity and of fear in their eyes. They know what this is. This is the beginning of the scourge of the sea. This is scurvy. Scurvy is a disease caused by a simple deficiency of vitamin C. Only it was rare. As even the poorest peasants die, it usually contained enough fresh vegetables or fruit to keep it at bay. But at sea, on a diet devoid of anything fresh, it was an inevitability. It was a slow, creeping horror that was responsible for more deaths at sea than all other causes combined, more than storms, more than shipwrecks, and far, far more than combat. A pirate was vastly more likely to die a slow, agonizing death from malnutrition than a quick, glorious one from a cannonball. The science of it wouldn't be understood for a long time, but the effects were terrifyingly clear. Vitamin C is essential for the body to produce collagen, the glue that holds your cells together. Without it, your body literally starts to fall apart. The first things to go are the tissues that regenerate quickly. Your gums, your skin. Small blood vessels become brittle and break, leading to bruising all over the body. Wounds refuse to heal. Old wounds, even those that have been scarred over for years, can spontaneously reopen as the collagen that formed the scar tissue breaks down. This is one of scurvy's most terrifying and bizarre symptoms. The body begins to devour its own scar tissue. There's a great deal of historical debate surrounding when, exactly, the link between citrus, fruit and a cure for scurvy was firmly established, while a Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind famously conducted one of the first clinical trials in 1747, demonstrating the effectiveness of oranges and lemons. The knowledge existed in some form long before that. For centuries, sailors and captains had noticed anecdotally that certain foods seemed to help. The Dutch Navy, for example, was known for carrying casks of sauerkraut, which contains a small amount of vitamin C. Yet, for some reason, This knowledge was slow to be adopted as standard practice. Bureaucracy, cost, and a simple lack of scientific understanding meant that 4 generations of sailors, like you, the disease remained a terrifying mystery. You start to notice the signs in others. A man's legs are covered in dark, spot ski bruises, though he hasn't bumped into anything. Another complains of excruciating pain in his joints, so bad he can barely walk. You see men with swollen gums, their teeth looking like loose pearls in a setting of rotting velvet. Their breath is unbelievably foul, a smell of decay that you can detect from several feet away. The ship is slowly turning into a floating hospital, and the disease is its only patient. The quartermaster watches this all with his usual grim expression. He knows what's happening. Every day you don't find a prize or make landfall is a day the disease gets a stronger hold on the crew. The ship isn't just in a race for gold. It's in a race against time, a race against its own decaying bodies. Sail ho! The cry from the crow's nest sends a jolt of electricity through the sluggish, ailing crew. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of life returns to their eyes. A ship, a prize. The captain barks orders, and even the men whose joints ache and whose gums bleed move with a newfound urgency. This isn't just about gold anymore. That ship on the horizon represents something far more valuable. A change in diet. It means fresh water, maybe different food, a break in the soul, crushing monotony. It might even have something, anything, that can halt the creeping decay of scurvy. You scramble to your station, your heart pounding with a mix of fear and desperate hope. The target is a merchant vessel, a fair, slow-moving ship flying English colors. She looks heavy in the water, a promising sign that her hold is full. The chase is on. Your ship, built for speed, closes the distance quickly. A cannon shot is fired across her bow, warning. The merchant ship, hopelessly outgunned, wisely chooses to surrender without a fight. The moment your ship pulls alongside the other, the grappling hooks fly. You're part of the boarding party, a cutlass in your hand that feels heavy and clumsy. You swarm over the rail, screaming and trying to look as fierce as possible. The merchant crew, pale-faced and terrified, offers no resistance. The ship is yours. The sense of victory is intoxicating. Men are cheering, slapping each other on the back. The immediate danger is over. Now, for the reward. While the captain deals with the other ship's officers and the quartermaster begins the formal process of logging the cargo. A few of you, driven by a primal hunger, head straight for the galleon, the ship's stores. You throw open the door to the pantry, your minds filled with visions of fresh baked bread, wheels of cheese, and barrels of apples. The reality is a punch to the gut. The storeroom looks depressingly familiar. There are the same barrels of salted beef, the same sacks of flour, the same casks of foul-smelling water, and there, stacked in a corner, are the large crates of hardtack. You break one open. It's the same rock-hard, soulless biscuit. And yes, when you look closely, you can see the telltale black specks of weevils. A collective groan of disappointment triples through your small group. Their larder is just as grim, just as depleted as your own. This was an incredibly common occurrence. The diet on a merchant ship, a naval vessel, or a pirate ship was fundamentally the same. They all drew from the same pool of provisions designed for long-term storage. The dream of capturing a floating banquet was almost always just that, a dream. Unless you were lucky enough to capture a ship that was only a few days out from port, you were essentially just capturing a mirror image of your own miserable pantry. You do find a few small luxuries. There's a small barrel of canary wine, a few pounds of tobacco, and, most excitingly, a cage with half a dozen live chickens. The chickens, skinny and pathetic as they are treated like crown jewels. The cook takes charge of them immediately, a rare smile cracking his grim face. These will be a feast, but a small one, reserved perhaps for the captain and the officers, or maybe shared out in tiny, tantalizing portions for the whole crew. One of the more peculiar things you might find on a captured ship was something called portable soup. This was a bizarre 18th century invention, a precursor to the modern vouvelle. It was made by boiling down meat and bones for hours and hours and hours until it was reduced to a thick, gelatinous goo. This goo was then dried into a hard, plastic-like block that was supposedly stable for years. To make soup, you would just break off a piece and dissolve it in hot water. While it sounds practical, sailors hated it. They claimed it tasted like glue and had very little nutritional value. Historians still debate its actual efficacy. It was a celebrated invention in London, heavily promoted by the Admiralty, but contemporary accounts from the men who had to eat it are almost universally scathing. Finding a crate of portable soup would be almost as disappointing as finding nothing at all. The quartermaster finishes his accounting. The main cargo is woolen textiles valuable. Yes, but you can't eat it. The captured sailors are given a choice. Join your crew or be set adrift in one of their own longboats. A few, looking as desperate as you once did, decide to sign your articles. The rest are put into the boat with a small supply of water and biscuit, left to their fate as you sail away, leaving the captured merchant ship wallowing in the waves. The initial elation has evaporated, replaced by the familiar taste of disappointment. You have more of the same, more hardtack, more shot horse. The chickens are a temporary reprieve, a fleeting moment of joy in a sea of blandness. The relentless advance of scurvy has not been stopped. The aches in your joints and the soreness in your gums are still there. The prize was a victory, but not the one you so desperately needed. The horizon is empty once again. The disappointment of the last prize settles over the crew like a damp fog. You have more food, but it's the same wretched stuff. The chickens were a delicious, fleeting memory, and now the familiar despair has returned, stronger than before. But pirates, if nothing else, are resourceful. They are masters of making do. With the immediate threat of starvation pushed back a little, the crew now turns its attention to a different challenge: how to make the disgusting food slightly less disgusting. You start to learn the desperate, ingenious, and sometimes horrifying tricks of the trade. These are the culinary secrets of the damned, passed down from one generation of long-suffering sailor to the next. Your first lesson is in dealing with the salt horse. The standard method of boiling it in seawater or towing it behind the ship in a net only does so much. A veteran sailor shows you a better way. He takes his portion of the greenish, rock-hard beef and begins to pound it mercilessly with a small mallet. He pounds and pounds until the dense meat starts to break apart, shredding into tough, salty fibers. He then takes these fibers and soaks them for hours in a bucket of precious fresh water from the cooking cask, changing the water several times. This is a controversial use of a valuable resource, but the cook turns a blind eye. Finally, he takes the rinsed, shredded meat and fries it in a pan with a generous dollop of slush from the cook's fat barrel. The result is a dish he calls dandy funk. It's still incredibly salty and tough, but the texture is different, and the act of frying it gives it a slightly more palatable, crispy character. It's a huge amount of work for a marginal improvement, but at this point, any improvement is a victory. Next, you learn how to handle the cheese. On rare occasions, a ship might have a wheel of cheese, usually a hard, aged variety like a Cheshire or a Gloucester. By the time you get to it, it's rarely in good condition. The outside is hard and dry, but the inside has often gone soft and is riddled with the same kind of maggots you find in the biscuits, only larger. These are called jumpers because of their tendency to leap when disturbed. The novice's instinct is to throw the whole foul, writhing mess overboard. The veteran sailor knows better. He shows you how they carefully scrape out the infested, semi-liquid interior of the cheese. They don't throw it away. Instead, they mix this pungent, maggot-laced goo with a bit of flour and some of the powdered hardtack, creating a thick paste. They then bake this on a hot brick from the galley stove, creating a crude, twice-baked, cheese-flavored biscuit. They argue that the baking process kills the maggots, and the sharp, ammoniated flavor of the spoiled cheese is so strong it overpowers everything else. You politely decline to try it. One of the most sought-after ingredients for masking foul flavors was pepper. A sack of peppercorns was worth its weight in. Well, pepper. A generous sprinkle of black pepper could do wonders to disguise the taste of rot in the meat or the mustiness of the biscuits. It was so valuable that the quartermaster kept it under lock and key, doling it out in tiny, precious rations. Perhaps the most curious and debated of these culinary tricks is the use of salmonudi. This was a famous pirate dish, a kind of grain, composed salad that was typically made in port, but sometimes attempted at sea with captured ingredients. A proper salmonudi was a feast for the eyes and the stomach. Layers of chopped, cooked meats, whatever was available, pickled vegetables, boiled eggs, anchovies, and fruits, all arranged in an elaborate pattern and drenched in a dressing of oil, vinegar, and spices. It was a chaotic, everything but the kitchen sink kind of dish. The name itself is a mystery. Historians and linguists are still arguing about its origin, with theories pointing to French, Spanish, or Italian roots. On board a ship long at sea, a salmonudi was a sad imitation. It would be made of chopped salt beef, maybe some pickled fish, if you had it, crushed tortilla, and all drenched in the only dressing available, a mix of wine or rum, and maybe some of the swash fat. It was a way of combining all your miserable ingredients into one, slightly more interesting, miserable dish. You watch these rituals with a mix of fascination and disgust. Men pounding meat, scraping maggot white cheese, carefully measuring out a few grains of pepper. It's a testament to the human spirit's refusal to give in completely. They can't make the food good, but they can make it different. They can exert some small measure of control over their grim circumstances. It's a fight against the monotony, a rebellion fought with a mallet and a frying pan. It's a way of saying, this life might be trying to kill me, but I will at least make my last meal on my own terms. You decide to offer the cook a hand, partly out of boredom and partly out of a desperate desire to be closer to the source of the food, however grim. This grants you a backstage pass to the ship's culinary heart, the galley, and it is a truly horrifying place. The galley isn't a room so much as a small, recessed nook on the deck, partially protected from the elements by a canvas overhang. The floor is slick with a permanent layer of grease, slime, and spilled grog. The air is thick with smoke that stings your eyes and coats the back of your throat. As the stove, a simple brick and iron box, has a chimney that is little more than a hole in the roof. The standards of hygiene are, to put it mildly, non-existent. The single cutting board is a slab of wood so deeply scarred with knife marks that it's impossible to ever truly clean. Bits of old food are embedded in its crevices, fostering their own microscopic ecosystems. The cook wipes it down with a rag that looks like it last saw clean water during the reign of Queen Anne. The cauldron used for boiling the meat and the burgoo has a permanent ring of grease come around its inner lip. It's scrubbed out with seawater and a handful of sand, which is the 18th century equivalent of an industrial disinfectant. And then there are the pests. The weevils and the biscuits are just the appetizer. The true dinner guests are the rats. They are everywhere, huge, old, and well-fed. They scurry along the beams overhead and dart along the edges of the deck. They are the ship's other, more successful, predators. They get into the food stores no matter how well sealed they are, gnawing through wooden barrels and thick canvas sacks. You often find their droppings in the flour sacks, a grim extra seasoning for your daily bread. The cook seems to have a long-running, personal war with the rats. He has a mangy-looking cat that is supposed to be the ship's Mauser, but it's lazy and often seems to be in a truce with its sworn enemies. The cook also has a collection of traps, but the rats are too clever for them. His most effective method is his cleaver. You watch one afternoon as he stands perfectly still, cleaver in hand, staring at a sack of oats. A large rat emerges, sniffing the air. In a movement too fast to follow, the cook's arm flashes out, and the cleaver flies through the air, pinning the rat to the deck with a sickening thud. He retrieves his cleaver, kicks the rat's body overboard, and goes back to his work without a word. This unsanitary environment is, of course, a primary cause of the food-borne illnesses that constantly plague the ship's crew. Dysentery, often called the bloody flux, was rampant. It was a vicious intestinal inflammation that caused severe diarrhea, fever, and dehydration. It could spread through a crew like wildfire, transmitted by contaminated food and water prepared in a place like this. A sick man couldn't work, and on a ship where every hand was needed, an outbreak could be catastrophic. one of the most disgusting, yet historically documented facts about the galley is the concept of the head cheese. This has nothing to do with the cheese you know. It was a truly vile practice where, if an animal like a pig or a sheep was slaughtered on board, its head would be boiled for hours. The meat, brains, and tongue would be picked from the skull and then pressed into a jellied loaf using the gelatin from the boiled bones. Given the lack of refrigeration and the unsanitary conditions, this was an incredibly risky dish to prepare and eat, a veritable petri dish of bacteria. Some historians debate whether this was common practice or a sensationalized rarity, but accounts of it do exist, a testament to the waste not, what not philosophy taken to its most extreme and dangerous conclusion. You spend a few hours helping the cook, mostly smashing hard tack and hauling buckets of seawater. It's hot, smoky, and nauseating work. You see him strain the water for the cauldron through a dirty cloth to catch the larger bits of slime. You see him wave away the flies that swarm around the meat barrel. You see him use the same hand to wipe sweat from his brow and then stir the stew. Any romantic notion you had about the pirate's life dies a final, greasy death right here in this galley. This is the engine room of your floating world, and it runs on filth and desperation. The food that comes out of here isn't just nutritionally bankrupt. It's actively hostile. Every meal is a gamble, a roll of the dice with your digestive system. You decide you've had enough of the galley. You'd rather face the rats in the dark of the hold than watch how your food is made in the light. You thank the cook, who just grunts, and you retreat to the relative fresh air of the main deck. Your appetite, somehow, even worse than before. One day, there's a ripple of genuine excitement through the crew. The quartermaster, after a careful inventory check, has authorized the opening of a very special barrel. It's a prize from the last captured ship that had been overlooked until now. A large wheel of Cheshire cheese, unlike the hard, dry, and often rancid cheese normally found on ships. Cheshire was a prized commodity. It was a younger, crumblier, and more flavorful cheese. For a moment, it feels like a holiday. The barrel is pried open, and the massive, cloth-wrapped wheel is lifted onto the deck. A cheer goes up. The cook takes his cleaver, wiping it on his apron first. Of course, and splits the wheel in half. The inside is pale, moist, and crumbly, just as it should be. The aroma is sharp and tangy, a world away from the usual stench of salt beef and bilge water. The quartermaster carefully supervises the cook as he cuts the cheese into wedges, one for each man. It's not a meal, just a small treat, but it feels like a banquet. You got your piece, holding it as if it were a piece of gold. You sit down, away from the others, to savor it. You take a small bite. The flavor explodes in your mouth, sharp, salty, milky, and complex. It's the most delicious thing you've tasted in months. It's a miracle. You close your eyes, letting the taste transport you back to a time of green fields on solid ground. Then you take a closer look at the wedge in your hand, embedded in the crumbly texture. You see something, a small, pale, worm-like creature. You stare at it, your heart sinking. It's a maggot. And now that you're looking for them, you see more. The cheese is alive. This isn't the dry, beetle-like weevils of the hardtack. These are plump, wriggling cheese maggots, the larvae of the cheese fly. The old sailor sitting near you sees the look on your face. The jumpers, he says, nodding sagely, a bit of extra life in it. That's how you know it's a ripe one. He explains, with a disturbing nonchalance, that this is perfectly normal for a cheese of this type after a long time at sea. Some men, he says, consider the maggots a delicacy. He pops a piece into his mouth, chews thoughtfully, and says, adds a bit of a spicy bite to it. Your stomach churns. The beautiful, miraculous cheese is now just a writhing ecosystem in your hand. This phenomenon was so common that it worked its way into popular culture. There were jokes and sayings about cheese that could walk itself to the table. In some parts of Europe, a cheese deliberately infested with these maggots, called kasum arzeu, is still considered a delicacy today, though its legality is a matter of constant debate. For you, however, it's a nightmare. This moment perfectly encapsulates the pirate's relationship with food. A brief, tantalizing glimpse of luxury and pleasure, immediately tainted by the grim reality of spoilage and infestation, a treasure that turns to dust or maggots in your hands. Historians still discuss the psychological impact of such moments. Did sailors become so hardened that they genuinely didn't mind, as the old sailor's comment suggests? Or was it a front, a mask of bravado to hide their disgust and despair? The truth is likely somewhere in between, varying from man to man. For every sailor who grimly ate his maggot white cheese, there was surely another, like you, whose heart sank at the sight. You are faced with a choice. To discard the cheese would be to throw away a rare treat, a break from the tyranny of the hardtack. To eat it would be well. To eat maggots, you watch as some men meticulously try to pick the creatures out. Others, following the old sailor's lead, eat it with gusto, either pretending not to notice or genuinely not caring. A few, like you, just stare at their portion in dismay. You make a compromise. You carefully take your knife and scrape away the most visibly infested parts, sacrificing a good portion of your precious ration. You eat the remaining, hopefully cleaner, bits in small, hesitant bites, trying not to think about what you can't see. The glorious flavor is still there, but it's forever tainted by the knowledge of what it contains. The joy has been stolen from the moment. It's a perfect metaphor for this life. The promise of riches is always there, but it's always crawling with something foul. You finish your cheese, but the aftertaste is one of bitter disappointment. The brief joy of the maggot white cheese is a distant memory. Now, the slow decay of scurvy is accelerating, and the ship has become a gallery of human misery. The initial symptoms, the fatigue, the bleeding gums, the aching joints have blossomed into a full-blown nightmare. Your body, deprived of the collagen it needs to maintain itself, is actively coming undone. You look at your own body and see a stranger. Your legs and arms are covered in large, dark bulges, bruises that appear from the slightest touch, or from nothing at all. They are called petechia, a result of the tiny blood vessels under your skin spontaneously rupturing. Your gums are now so swollen and spongy that they have started to grow over your teeth, which are terrifyingly loose. Eating is an agony. The hardtack, even when soaked, feels like gravel against your raw, bleeding mouth. The foul taste of rot from your own gums overwhelms any flavor the food might have. Your breath is putrid, the smell of sickness and decay. The ship is filled with the sounds of suffering. Men groan in their hammocks, their joints so swollen and painful they can no longer walk. The slightest movement is an ordeal. To get from your bunk to the deck is a monumental effort that leaves you breathless and trembling. You see men with open, weeping sores on their skin, wounds that will not heal. The ship's stench is no longer just of tar and salt meat. It's now layered with the smell of sickness, the metallic tang of blood, and the sweet, cloying odor of rotting flesh. The psychological effects are just as devastating. A profound and unshakable depression has taken hold of you and the rest of the afflicted. You feel a complete loss of spirit, a deep and pervasive lethargy that makes it hard to even care. You are irritable and prone to sudden, irrational flashes of anger. You see a man break down into tears for no reason, and you understand completely. Your mind, like your body, is beginning to break down. One of the most ghastly, unwell-documented symptoms of advanced scurvy is the change in personality. Men who were once cheerful and brave become paranoid, listless, and timid. It's as if the disease attacks the very essence of a person. Historical accounts are filled with descriptions of crews that became so debilitated, so lacking in will, that they were unable to perform the simplest sailing tasks, leaving the ship to drift aimlessly at the mercy of the wind and tides. You witness one of scurvy's cruelest tricks firsthand. A man next to you, a tough sailor who boasted a large, wicked-looking scar on his forearm from a knife fight years ago, wakes up screaming. His old scar, a pale, silvery line that had been a part of him for a decade, has opened up. It's now a raw, gaping wound, as fresh and bloody as the day it was inflicted. His body, in its desperate search for protein, has broken down the scar tissue that held it together. It's a vision from a horror story. The past is literally coming back to wound you. The debate among historians here is not about the symptoms, which are gruesomely well documented. But about the pirates' understanding of them, did they know what caused scurvy, or was it seen as a curse, a form of divine punishment? The evidence suggests a confusing mix. While the medical establishment was slow to catch on, experienced sailors certainly made the connection between long voyages, a lack of fresh food, and the onset of the disease. They knew that making landfall and eating fresh greens and fruit was the only cure. They called it land fever, a desperate craving for the shore. So while they didn't know about vitamin C, they knew the practical solution. The tragedy was how often that solution was just out of reach, a few weeks too far over the horizon. The quartermaster and the cook do what little they can. They brew a foul-tasting tea from pine needles, a folk remedy that actually contains a small amount of vitamin C, though likely not enough to halt the disease's advance. They make sure the sickest men are given the warmest, driest spots to sleep. But these are tiny gestures against a tidal wave of disease. You lie in your hammock, feeling your teeth wobble with your tongue. You feel a profound and terrifying sense of detachment, as if you're a spectator to your own body's slow-motion demolition. The dream of golden glory is gone, replaced by a single, desperate prayer to feel solid ground under your feet and to taste something, anything, that is fresh and green and alive. The food supplies are now dangerously low. The last of the captured ships' provisions are gone, and your own barrels are scraping the bottom. The quartermaster, his face grimmer than ever, announces a further cut in rations. The daily allotment of hardtack is reduced from 2 biscuits to 1. Meat day, once a weekly event, is now a distant memory. The mood on the ship, already bleak from the ravages of scurvy, turns dark and mutinous. A hungry crew is an angry crew. To stretch the dwindling supplies, the cook resorts to the ultimate food of desperation. Burgo. The name itself sounds like a mouthful of mud, and the reality isn't much better. Burgo, sometimes called labali, is a watery, slimy porridge, the sailor's gruel. The recipe is simple and depressing. The cook takes a handful of oats. The last sack is crawling with insects, but no one cares any more and boils them in a large cauldron of water. He keeps adding water until the mixture is stretched thin. A pale, translucent slurry. To this, he adds whatever else he can find. He smashes the last few biscuits into dust and stirs them into act as a thickener. He might add a few spoonfuls of slush from the fat barrel for a hint of flavor and a few calories. The result is a thin, gray, lumpy gruel. It's served warm, in your tin cup, and it's the only meal of the day. You stare into the cup at the unappetizing slop. It has the consistency of wallpaper paste and evade. Musty taste. It's warm, and it fills your belly for a short while, but it has almost no nutritional value. It is the culinary equivalent of admitting defeat. It's a food designed solely to trick your stomach into thinking it has been fed. The crew gathers to eat in a tense silence. The usual grumbling and dark humor are gone, replaced by a sullen, brooding quiet. Men sip their burgoo, their eyes hollow. Scurvy has weakened their bodies, but it's this new, more acute hunger that is sharpening their tempers. You can feel the tension coiling on the deck. Men look at the quartermaster with open resentment. They look at the captain with accusation in their eyes. Why haven't they found a prize? Why haven't they made landfall? The history of burgoo is a history of naval poverty. It was a staple on ships of the Royal Navy, especially for the sick and infirm, as it was easy to swallow. For pirates, who operated without the vast, organized supply chain of a national navy, resorting to burgoo meant you were at the absolute end of your rope. It was a sign that the voyage had failed, that you were officially in a state of starvation. A particularly grim and little-known fact about these times of starvation is the economy of leftovers. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was wasted. The cook would scrape the cauldron clean, and even the scrapings were a valuable commodity. A sailor might be allowed to lick the pan, a privilege granted for some small favor. Furthermore, any burgoo that was left over in a man's cup wasn't thrown away. It was oft uncollected and added back to the pot for the next day's meal, a process that certainly didn't help with the ship's already catastrophic hygiene. The historical debate around these moments of extreme privation focuses on the breaking point of the pirate social contract. The articles, the democratic code you sign, were designed for sharing plunder, not for sharing starvation. At what point does every man gets a vote break down when a man is starving? Do the rules of democracy still apply? Or does the law of the jungle take over? Accounts from shipwrecked crews and long, unsuccessful voyages suggest that the command structure could collapse entirely, with factions forming and violence breaking out over the last handful of votes. You finish your burgo. The slimy coating it leaves in your mouth a constant reminder of your hunger. The gnawing emptiness in your stomach is a physical pain. The ship is adrift in more ways than one. It's adrift on the ocean, and its crew is adrift from the rules and camaraderie that once held them together. The social fabric of the ship is fraying, thread by thread, with every watery, tasteless spoonful of gruel. You look at the faces of your crewmates. They are no longer your brothers of the coast. They are your competitors for the next meal, and there's not enough to go around. The burgoo diet lasts for 3 agonizing days. On the 4th day, the oat sack is empty. There is nothing left but a few barrels of the worst hardtack, the stuff so broken and moldy it was considered unusable, and the slimy water in the cask. The ship is effectively out of food. The quartermaster, his face a stony mask, makes the official announcement. Rations are cut again. From now on, it's half a biscuit per man, per day, and nothing else. The news lands not with a shout, but with a low, dangerous growl that seems to emanate from the entire crew. The fragile quiet of the past few days shatters. The coiled tension finally snaps. A large, bearded sailor, his face gaunt from hunger and his eyes wild, takes a step forward. He points a trembling finger at the quartermaster. "You've been holding out on us," he roars, his voice cracking. There's more in that storeroom. Another man joins him. And the captain. Where's he sailing us? To our graves. Suddenly, the deck is a tinderbox. Men who have been listless and sick for weeks are now on their feet, fueled by a final, desperate surge of adrenaline. They are shouting, waving their fists. The specter of mutiny, always lurking in the shadows of a pirate ship, has now stepped into the light. You stand back, watching it unfold, your own hunger a cold knot in your stomach. This is the ultimate test of the pirate code. The captain and the quartermaster stand their ground, their hands resting on the pistols tucked into their belts. The captain tries to placate the crowd, his booming voice strained. He talks of a plan, of a nearby shipping lane, of the certainty of a prize. But the men are beyond promises. Their bellies are empty now. The quartermaster, in a surprisingly bold move, unhooks the heavy ring of keys from his belt and tosses them to the lead mutineer. "See for yourself," he says, his voice flat and cold. "Go on, see the riches we're hiding from you." A few of the men, their suspicion overriding their rage for a moment, take the keys and unlock the storeroom. They disappear inside. The rest of the crew waits, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. After a few minutes, the men emerge from the hole, their faces crestfallen. They hold up a handful of weevil-infested biscuit, crumbs and a piece of green-tinged salt beef so hard and dry it looks like a fossil. They found nothing. The quartermaster wasn't lying. There is no secret stash. There is only starvation. The rage of the crew deflates, replaced by a profound and utter despair. The mutiny fizzles out before it can truly begin. What's the point of overthrowing the captain if there's no food to be gained? You are all, quite literally, in the same boat. This scenario was the pirate captain's greatest fear. A captain's authority was not granted by a king or a government. It was granted by the consent of his crew, and that consent was conditional on his ability to lead them to profit. A captain who failed to find prizes was a captain who would be deposed. The process was usually democratic. The crew would simply vote him out of office. However, in desperate times like these, it could be far more violent. The history of piracy is littered with the names of captains who were marooned, cast adrift, or simply killed by a crew that had lost faith in them. A strange and debated aspect of pirate mutinies is the role of the round robin. To avoid having a single ringleader who could be identified and punished, a crew considering mutiny would sometimes sign their names on a document in a circle. like the spokes of a wheel. This way, no single name was at the top of the list. It was a physical manifestation of collective responsibility. Whether this was a common to lore or romanticized invention is hard to say, but it speaks to the complex blend of democracy and paranoia that governed pirate life. The failed mutiny leaves a scar on the crew. The trust between the officers and the men is broken. The camaraderie is gone. Now, every man is an island, locked in his own private struggle with hunger. The half a biscuit you receive that evening feels like an insult. You break it in half again, saving a piece for the morning. A tiny act of foresight in a world with no future. You gnaw on your pathetic ration, the dry crumbs scratching your raw throat. The hunger is no longer just an ache in your stomach. It's a living thing, a predator, and it's stalking every man on this ship. The question is no longer if it will claim a victim, but who will be the first to fall. Just when the last sliver of hope seems to have vanished, the lookout, his voice hoarse and weak, cries out the one word that can save you: land. At first, you think it's a hallucination, a cruel trick of a starving mind, but then you see it too. A dark smudge on the horizon, growing steadily larger. It's an island, not a bustling port, but a small, uninhabited dot in the vastness of the ocean. It doesn't matter. Land is land, and land means life. Indo energy, born of desperation, surges through the crew. Men who could barely stand are now helping to trim the sails. The ship, which has felt like a floating coffin, suddenly feels like a vessel of salvation. The captain steers you towards a sheltered cove, and the anchor drops with a splash that sounds like a promise fulfilled. The long boats are lowered, and you scramble into one, your hands trembling. The short row to the beach feels like an eternity. The moment your feet touch the wet sand, you almost collapse with relief. Solid ground. After months of the ceaseless rolling of the ship, the stillness of the earth is a dizzying sensation. You and the other men stagger onto the beach, looking around with wild eyes. The island is lush and green, a paradise of vegetation. You see men literally stuffing handfuls of leaves and strange grasses into their mouths, their bodies craving anything fresh. But the true prize is discovered by a scouting party. They return to the beach, their faces alight with a kind of holy joy. They have found a sea turtle nesting ground. The beach on the other side of the small island is teeming with huge green sea turtles that have come ashore to lay their eggs. For a sailor in the 18th century, a turtle was not a majestic sea creature. It was a godsend. It was a walking pantry. The hunt is on. The turtles are large and cumbersome on land, and the starving crew, armed with clubs and knives, has no trouble flipping them onto their backs, where they are helpless. The butchery is swift and brutal. The turtles are killed, and their shells are pried open. The sight of the fresh, red meat is enough to make you weep. Here is food. Real, honest-to-goodness fresh meat, in abundance. That night, the beach is a scene of frantic, joyous celebration. Huge fires are lit along the shore. The cook, revitalized, directs the preparation of the feast. Thick, turtle steaks are thrown directly onto the flames, the sound of their sizzling a music more beautiful than any shanty. The meat is rich, tender, and has a flavor somewhere between beef and veal. It is the most delicious thing you have ever eaten. You gorge yourself, eating until your stomach hurts, and then you eat some more. The turtle eggs, found in deep sandy nests, are another treasure. They are boiled in the cauldron with fresh water from a stream discovered on the island. They have a rich, oily taste, and you devour them by the handful. For the first time in months, you are not just full, you are satisfied. The scurvy-ridden men seem to miraculously recover their spirits. The pain in their joints seems to lessen, and the color returns to their faces. While turtle meat doesn't contain a huge amount of vitamin C, the sheer influx of fresh protein and nutrients has an immediate, powerful effect. The historical importance of turtles, particularly the green sea turtle, to pirates and sailors of this era cannot be overstated. These reptiles were a vital source of fresh food that could literally be stored alive on the ship's deck for weeks. By periodically dousing them with seawater, they could be kept alive, providing a source of fresh meat long after leaving land. The Cayman Islands, in fact, got their name and their start as a settlement precisely because they were a massive turtle nesting ground. a natural larder for any ship passing through the Caribbean. A lesser known, and rather odd, delicacy derived from the turtle was its fat. The green fat of the sea turtle was rendered down to produce a clear, greenish oil. This oil was highly prized, not just for cooking, but as a remedy. It was rubbed on the skin to soothe sores and taken internally as a purgative. Some accounts claim it was a cure for all sorts of ailments. Whether it had any real medicinal properties is highly debatable among historians, but in a world with no real medicine, belief was a powerful tool. You lie on the warm sand, your belly full, watching the stars appear in a sky unobscured by sails and rigging. The firelight flickers on the faces of your crewmates. They are laughing, sharing stories, their faces greasy with turtle fat. The brutal hunger and the specter of mutiny feel like a bad dream. The island has saved you. The turtles have saved you. For tonight, at least, you are not starving pirates on the verge of death. You are kings, feasting in your green island paradise. The turtle feast lasts for several glorious days. The crew's health and morale improve dramatically with each meal of fresh meat. The most severe symptoms of scurvy begin to recede, and men who were bedridden are now walking the beach, their strength slowly returning. Several turtles are captured and hauled aboard the ship, kept alive on the deck as a future food source. The island has given you a reprieve, a second chance. But the island's resources are not infinite. The nesting season is ending, and the turtles are becoming scarce. It's time to leave. You set sail with full bellies and renewed hope. But the fundamental problem remains. Your destination is still weeks away, and your renewed supplies are finite. The live turtles on deck are a comfort, but you know they won't last forever. As the days turn into a week, and then two, the familiar routine of dwindling rations begins again. The last of the turtle meat is consumed, and the quartermaster, with grim reluctance, brings out the old enemy, the hardtack and the last few pieces of salt horse. The return to the old diet is psychologically devastating. After tasting fresh food, the stale biscuit and salty meat seem even more disgusting than before. The hunger returns, and with it, the tension. The memory of the feast makes the current reality of starvation even sharper. And then, a new, horrifying conversation begins to circulate among the crew. It starts as a dark joke, a muttered comment in the shadows, but it quickly gains a terrifying sincerity. The conversation is about the rats. You've lived with the ship's rats for the entire voyage. They are a constant, unwelcome presence. You've cursed them, thrown things at them, watched the cook wage his one-man war against them. But you've always seen them as pests, as vermin. Now, in the depths of your hunger, you start to see them differently. You see them through the eyes of a predator. They are, after all, meat. They are protein. They are scurrying, twitching morsels of survival. The idea is deeply repulsive. Rats are creatures of filth, associated with disease and decay. To eat a rat feels like a profound violation, a step down the ladder of civilization. But hunger is a powerful persuader. It gnaws away at your revulsion, replacing it with a cold, desperate logic. The first man to do it is one of the new hands, a young man driven half mad by hunger. He manages to corner and kill a large rat in the hold. He skins it crudely and roasts it over a small, illicit fire he makes with a few splinters of wood. The smell of the cooking meat is strange and game-wise. The other men watch him. Their face is a mixture of disgust and intense curiosity. He eats the small creature greedily, tones in dull, his eyes shut. When he's done, he doesn't look sick. He just looks less hungry. And with that, a taboo is broken. The next day, another man catches and eats a rat. Then another. Rat hunting becomes a grim, silent sport on the ship. Men set crude snares or lie in wait for hours, hoping to catch their next meal. The rats, once the bold masters of the ship, become wary and scarce, retreating into the deepest, darkest corners of the hold. Eating rats during times of siege or starvation is a practice as old as humanity. There are accounts of it from ancient Rome to the sieges of Paris in the 19th century. For sailors, it was a known, if dreaded, last resort. There's a persistent, though likely apocryphal, sailor's tale about the price of rats. The story goes that during a famine on a long voyage, a single rat could be sold for a high price, becoming a valuable commodity. This is a topic of some debate for historians. Was it a literal truth? Or was it a dark joke? A piece of gallows humor meant to illustrate the depths of their desperation? The answer is probably the latter, a way of putting a monetary value on the invaluable. A single bite of food. A truly weird piece of culinary trivia related to this is the specific preparation. Some historical accounts suggest that sailors would try to purify the rat meat by soaking it in salt water and then boiling it with a piece of biscuit to absorb the game-y flavor. Others insisted on skinning them carefully, unroasting them over hot coals to kill any surface bacteria. It was a crude attempt at food science, born of a desperate hope to make the inedible not just edible, but safe. You, however, cannot bring yourself to do it. Your stomach rebels at the very thought. You stick to your half biscuit a day, watching the rat eaters with a sense of dread. You feel a line has been crossed, that the crew is descending into a state of savagery. The ship has become a more primal place. The camaraderie is gone, replaced by the solitary, furtive hunt for sustenance. You are no longer a crew. You are a pack of starving animals, trapped together in a wooden cage, and you have begun to eat the other animals in the cage with you. The grim reality of the rat diet has settled upon the ship. The men who partake in it are gaunt and wild-eyed, but they have a flicker of energy that the rest of you lack. The social order has been completely upended, now divided between the rat eaters and those who, like you, cannot bring themselves to cross that line. The silence on the ship is heavy, broken only by the creak of the rigging and the occasional, desperate scuffle in the hold as a man corners his prey, to pass the time and to distract from the gnawing hunger in your belly. The old sailors resort to one of their last remaining comforts, telling stories. They gather in a small group on the deck as the sun sets, their voices low and raspy. They don't tell stories of grand battles or mountains of gold anymore. The energy for such tales is gone. Instead, they tell stories about food, dark, humorous, and deeply weird stories that have been passed down through generations of starving sailors. Tonight's storyteller is the old salt who first introduced you to weevils, a man who seems to have a story for every occasion of misery. His chosen topic is the salt pork. He claims, with a perfectly straight face, that the barrels of pork issued by the naval suppliers were so old and so poorly preserved that the meat sometimes developed a kind of life of its own. He spins a yarn about a ship he once served on where a barrel of salt pork was opened to reveal a piece of meat that had supposedly been packed during the time of the Spanish Armada, a century earlier. The salt was so thick, he claims, and the meat so ancient, that it had petrified into a substance harder than wood. The cook's cleaver just bounced off it. They ended up using it as a ballast stone in the hold. Another sailor picks up the thread, telling a story about a piece of salt pork that was so green with molten phosphorescence that it glowed in the dark. The crew, he jokes, didn't need lanterns in the hold as long as they had their glowing bacon. They hung it from a beam, and it served as a dim, stinking nightlight. These stories are, of course, exaggerations, the tall tales for which sailors are famous. But like all good tall tales, they are rooted in a kernel of truth. The truth is that the salted meat was oft unshockingly old. The bureaucracy of naval victualling was immense and inefficient. Barrels of meat could sit in warehouses for years, their origins long forgotten, before being loaded onto a ship. A sailor could very well be eating meat that was older than he was. The storyteller then lowers his voice, as if sharing a sacred secret. He tells the ultimate legend of the salt meat, a story that you will hear variants of in every port. It's the legend of the walking pork. He swears on his life that on a particular voyage, a cook boiled a chunk of salt pork, and when he turned his back, the piece of meat grew legs and walked right out of the pot. He describes it in vivid detail. The two little legs sprouting from the greasy slab, the way it's cuddled across the galley floor and dug into a red hole, never to be seen again. The other sailors nod grimly, some even claiming to have seen a similar phenomenon themselves. This bizarre legend is a fascinating piece of folklore. Historians and folklorists who have studied these tales have a few theories about their origin. One theory is that the legs were actually just maggots or other larvae, which, when the meat was boiled, would wriggle violently, creating the illusion of movement. A starving, sleep-deprived sailor could easily mistake this for the meat itself coming to life. Another theory is that it was simply a form of gallows humor, a way to personify the awful food, to turn it into a monstrous character in a story as a way of coping with having to eat it. The debate continues. Was it a shared delusion, a metaphor, or just a really good joke? A particularly weird offshoot of this folklore is the idea that you could tame the salt meat. Some stories claim that if you carved the meat into the shape of an animal and left it a small offering of biscuit crumbs, it would become docile and easier to eat. This is almost certainly a pure fabrication, but it speaks to the deep-seated need to find some sort of magic or ritual to control their horrific diet. You listen to these stories, your own hunger adulate. The tales are grotesque and absurd, but they serve a purpose. They create a shared mythology of suffering. By turning the rotten meat into a legendary monster, the sailors give their misery a name and a face. They are not just victims of poor naval logistics. They are brave adventurers battling the semi-sentient salt pork from hell. It's a strange and roundabout way of reclaiming a little bit of dignity. The stories don't fill your belly, but for a little while, they fill the oppressive silence and make the darkness feel a little less hungry. The ship is dying, the sails are tattered, the ropes are frayed, and the hull is overgrown with a thick carpet of barnacles and seaweed. This growth, you learn, is not just ugly, it's dangerous. It creates an immense amount of drag, slowing the ship down to a crawl. In your desperate state, speed is everything. The captain makes a decision. You must careen the ship. Careening is a difficult and perilous process. You find a sheltered, deserted beach on another small island and run the ship aground during high tide. As the tide goes out, the ship is left listing on its side, one half of its hull exposed to the air. It's a vulnerable position. An enemy ship or a sudden storm could spell your doom, but it's a necessary risk. The entire crew, or what's left of it, disembark as. The sickest men are laid out on the sand under a makeshift shelter. For the rest of you, the hard work begins. Your job is to clean the hull. You are given crude scrapers and brushes, and you set to work, chipping and scrubbing away the thick layer of marine life. It's back-breaking labor under a hot sun. The stench is overwhelming, a thick, salty, fishy smell of decay. As you scrape away the barnacles, you discover the true culprit of the ship's sluggishness, the teredo worm, or shipworm. It's not a worm at all, but a type of saltwater clam notorious for boring into submerged wood. The hull is riddled with their tunnels, weakening the very structure of your vessel. The ship's carpenter, one of the few men still possessing some energy, directs the repairs. He plugs the holes with oakum and seals them with a mixture of hot pitch and tallow. While the repairs are underway, another, more urgent activity begins. Foraging. The island is small and rocky. Not the lush paradise of the Turtle Island, but hunger makes you sharp-eyed. Every man who isn't working on the hull becomes a hunter-gatherer. You scour the small island for anything edible. You find limpets and mussels clinging to the rocks at the low-tide line. You pry them off with your knife and eat them raw. They taste of salt and mud, but they are fresh, and they are food. You gather seabird eggs from the precarious cliffs, risking a fall for the precious ovals of protein. You dig for roots, though you don't know which are poisonous and which are safe. You watch what the seabirds eat and follow their lead. A risky game of culinary roulette. This is the pirate diet at its most primitive. It's no longer about provisions from a barrel. It's about what you can catch with your own two hands. The concept of taste is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is calories. One of the most sought-after and strangest of foraged foods during this time was dulse, a type of edible red seaweed. Sailors, particularly those from northern European countries like Scotland and Ireland, knew of its properties. When dried, it could be chewed like a tough, salty jerky. It was rich in vitamins and minerals, and though they didn't know the science, sailors knew that chewing dulse could help ward off the worst effects of scurvy. Whether this specific knowledge was widespread among multinational pirate crews is a point of academic debate. But for those who knew, a patch of dulse could be a life-saving discovery. You watch as a group of men manages to catch a few small, ugly fish in a tidal pool using a ragged piece of canvas as a net. They guard their catch jealously, a reminder that the camaraderie of the turtle feast is a distant memory. The share-and-share-alike principle of the pirate code has been suspended. It's every man for himself. The careening process takes over a week. It's a period of intense labor and desperate foraging. You are exhausted, sunburned, and still hungry, but the work provides a focus, a distraction from the despair. Repairing the ship feels like you are repairing yourselves, plugging the holes in your own broken vessel. Cleaning the hull feels like scrubbing away the decay that has taken root in your own bodies and souls. Finally, the work is done. The hull is clean and patched. With the next high tide, the ship is refloated, and you climb back on board. She feels different, lighter, more responsive. Foraging has provided a small, temporary boost to your food stores and your health. You have a few sacks of shellfish, some salted fish, and a renewed, albeit fragile, sense of hope. You have survived another crisis. The ship is whole again, but the open ocean awaits, and your ultimate destination is still a long, hungry way off. The small boost from the foraged food is gone within a week. The hunger returns, deeper and more painful than ever before. The crew is a collection of skeletons, draped in rags, their minds clouded by starvation and the lingering effects of scurvy. The ship drifts aimlessly, the men too weak to properly manage the sails. The captain, a ghost of his former self, can barely stand. The quartermaster's logbook lies empty. There is nothing left to account for. One evening, what remains of the command structure makes a final, desperate decision. A small group of men, deemed the most troublesome or the least useful, are to be marooned. It is a death sentence, but a necessary one, they argue. A way to stretch the last few drops of water and the final handful of biscuit, crumbs for those who remain. It is the ultimate failure of the pirate brotherhood. Your name is on the list. Perhaps you were too weak to work, or perhaps you simply looked at the captain the wrong way. The reason doesn't matter. The verdict is final. You and 3 other men are herded into a longboat. You are given a single pistol with 1 shot, a small amount of gunpowder, a cutlass, and a jug of water. The pirate code, in its grim mercy, dictates that a marooned man should be given the means to end his own suffering. The longboat rows away from the ship, leaving you on the beach of yet another deserted island. This one is a barren strip of sand and rock, with a few scrubby palms and nothing else. You watch as your ship, your former home and prison, sails away, shrinking on the horizon until it vanishes completely. The silence that descends is absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves on the shore. You are alone, utterly and completely alone. The 4 of you are no longer a crew. You are 4 starving individuals, trapped on a rock in the middle of the ocean. The little water you have will not last long. The pistol represents a grim choice. Do you use the single shot to hunt, hoping to find some animal on this barren rock, or do you save it for yourself, for the moment when the thirst and hunger become unbearable? Your days become a blur of desperate survival. You walk the perimeter of the island again and again, your eyes scanning the sand for anything. You find a few crabs, which you smash with a rock and eat raw. You try to fish with a sharpened stick, but you are too weak and slow. The sun beats down, and the thirst becomes an obsession. You drink the last of the water from the jug. The story of marooning is one of the most iconic parts of pirate lore, most famously depicted in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. The reality was far less romantic. It was a common, brutal punishment, a way of disposing of unwanted men without the messiness of a formal execution. The most famous marooned man was Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish sailor whose experience of being left alone on an island in the South Pacific for 4 years is widely believed to have been the inspiration for the novel Robinson Crusoe. A little-known and much-debated aspect of marooning is the governor of the island. In some pirate crews, it was supposedly a dark joke to promote the man being marooned, declaring him the governor of his new, deserted domain. It was a piece of theatrical cruelty. a final twist of the knife that highlighted the utter hopelessness of his situation. Historians argue whether this was a regular practice or just another piece of gallows humor that became part of the legend. As the days pass, the four of you begin to look at each other differently. The unspoken understanding that bound you together as fellow sufferers begins to fray. The hunger is now a madness, and in the eyes of the other men, you no longer see comradeship. You see desperation. You see the cold calculus of survival. You lie in the sand, your body too weak to move, your tongue swollen from thirst. You stare at the empty blue sky, listening to the waves. This is the end of the line. Your grand adventure, your escape to freedom, has led you to this. A slow, anonymous death on a forgotten patch of sand. The treasures you dreamed of have been reduced to a single drop of water, a single crab, a single choice represented by the cold, heavy pistol lying beside you. The feast of the pirates, you now understand, was always a famine in disguise, and you are its final, unappetizing course. You are drifting in and out of consciousness on the barren island, the line between waking and dreaming blurred by thirst and starvation. The sun is a merciless hammer, and the sound of the waves is a constant, mocking whisper. In your lucid moments, you watch the other three men. The fragile bond of shared victimhood has shattered completely. Now, they are just shapes, moving with a terrifying slowness, their eyes filled with a primal calculus you understand all too well. This is the moment when the final, most terrible taboo of the sea begins to surface. It is never spoken aloud. It doesn't need to be. It hangs in the air, thick and heavy as the humid heat. It is the grim logic of the lifeboat, the last, desperate measure when all other food is gone. It is known as the custom of the sea. The custom of the sea was the unspoken, unwritten, and horrificously practical code that sailors sometimes followed when faced with certain starvation. When a crew was adrift with no hope of rescue, they would resort to a lottery. Lots would be drawn, usually straws of different lengths, and the man who drew the short straw would be killed, so that his body could provide sustenance for the others to live a little longer. It was a gruesome, desperate pact, a utilitarian nightmare played out on the open ocean. You see the men gathering, their movements stiff and ritualistic. One of them holds for splinters of wood in his fist. 3 are of equal length. 1 is shorter. There are no words. There is only the grim understanding in their hollow eyes. You are too weak to resist, too delirious to protest. You are part of this terrible lottery, whether you want to be or not. You extend a trembling hand and pull a splinter. This practice, while central to the darkest legends of the sea, is a point of significant historical debate. Was it a widely accepted custom, as the name implies, or was it an exceedingly rare and sensationalized event? The evidence points to the latter. While there are a handful of documented cases, most famously the 1884 case of the yacht Magnante, where the survivors were put on trial for murder upon their rescue. These incidents were notorious precisely because they were so shocking and rare. For pirates, who were already outlaws, the legal ramifications were less of a concern than the moral and psychological ones. The custom of the sea represents the absolute breakdown of all social order, a return to the most basic, brutal law of survival. In your delirium, your mind flashes back to stories you heard on the ship, whispered when the grog was flowing, tales of stranded crews, of lots being drawn. A particularly strange and ghoulish detail from these tales sometimes included the ton-time principle. A ton-time was a 17th century investment plan where each subscriber pays a sum into a fund, and the last survivor takes the entire pot. The sailor's dark version of this was that the man who survived by consuming his comrades was entitled to their share of any future prize money. It's almost certainly a fictional embellishment, a macabre joke, but it speaks to the way pirates tried to impose a twisted sort of order and financial logic onto even the most horrific acts. You look at the splinter in your hand. It's long, a wave of relief so profound its nauseating washes over you. You are safe, for now. Another man draws. His is also long. The third man draws. He looks at his splinter, and then he looks at the last man standing. The lottery is over. The unlucky one has been chosen. He doesn't scream or fight. He simply sits down on the sand, his face a mask of utter despair, and waits You turn away. You cannot watch. You crawl a few feet down the beach, the sound of the waves filling your ears, trying to drown out the silence behind you. You think about your journey, the dream of freedom, the stinking barrels, the weevils, the salt horse, the scurvy, the rats. It has all led to this. This is the final meal on the pirate menu. It is not a feast of stolen delicacies, but a banquet of nightmares. The custom of the sea is not a custom. It is the abject failure of humanity. In the face of an empty ocean and an empty stomach, the sun begins to set, casting a blood-red light over the sand, and you close your eyes, praying for a rescue that will never come, or for the end, which surely will. You are saved, not by another ship, not by some miracle of navigation, but by pure, dumb luck. A Spanish fishing vessel, blown far off course by a storm, stumbles upon your wretched island. To them, you and the other survivor, a hollowed-out shell of a man who never speaks, are terrifying apparitions. Ghosts, risen from the sand. You are hauled aboard. Your body so light, it feels like you're made of paper. You are too weak to even ask where you are going. You simply collapse onto the deck and let the darkness take you. You wake up days later. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's not the familiar shipboard stench of tar, rot, and despair. It's a rich, complex aroma of wood smoke, roasting meat, flowers, and damp earth. It's the smell of life. You open your eyes and find you are not on a ship, but in a bed. A real bed, with a straw mattress and a thin wool blanket. In a small, dark room, a woman places a bowl of warm broth beside you. You try to drink it, but your hands shake too much. She helps you, tilting the bowl to your lips. The broth is thin, but it tastes of chicken and herbs. It is the most exquisite flavor you have ever known. You have been brought to Port Royal, Jamaica, before its partial destruction by an earthquake in 1692. It was known as the wickedest city on earth, the great pirate haven of the Caribbean. By your time, in the early 18th century, its golden age is fading, but it remains a bustling, chaotic, and vibrant port, a place where a man can disappear and reappear without too many questions being asked. Over the next few weeks, you slowly, painfully, recover. The transition back to a normal diet is an ordeal. Your shrunken stomach can only handle small amounts of soft food. Broth gives way to porridge, then to mashed vegetables, and finally to solid food. The first time you eat a piece of fresh bread, you cry. The soft texture, the used to smell, the simple, honest taste of baked wheat, it's an overwhelming sensory experience. Your body, so long abused, greets every new flavor with a kind of shock and gratitude. You venture out into the streets of Port Royal. The world is a riot of sights, sounds, and smells. The sensory deprivation of the sea is replaced by a sensory explosion. There are market stalls piled high with fruits you've only dreamed of. Mangoes, papayas, pineapples. The colors are so bright, they hurt your eyes. Vendors are selling roasted yams, fried plantains, and pepper pot soup. A rich, spicy stew that makes your mouth water from a block away. The air is thick with the scent of spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice that you've only ever heard of in sailors' tales. This sensory overload is a common theme in the accounts of sailors returning from long voyages, after months of a diet consisting of maybe 4 or 5 distinct and uniformly bad tastes and textures. The complexity of real food was almost a psychedelic experience. It was a reminder of what the world had to offer, and what they had been missing. You find a tavern, a noisy, smoky place filled with sailors and pirates, recognizable by their swagger and the quality of their stolen clothes. You take your small bit of money, earned from a few days of work on the docks, and you buy a plate of roasted pork and a mug of real, unwatered beer. The pork is tender, the skin is crisp, and it's served with a sauce made from actual vegetables. You eat slowly, deliberately, savoring every single bite. This is the feast you imagined when you first signed the articles. This is the treasure. It wasn't gold or jewels. It was a simple, well-cooked meal. A bizarre, and much debated, aspect of pirate cuisine in port was their supposed love for overly rich and complicated dishes. After months of blandness, they would allegedly spend their prize money on the most extravagant foods they could find, combining expensive ingredients in strange ways. There are tales of pirates ordering salmagundi, made with a dozen kinds of meat and fish, drenched in wine and spices, a chaotic reflection of their own lives. Historians wonder if this was a true culinary preference or simply conspicuous consumption, a way of showing off their wealth in the most immediate and gratifying way possible, by literally eating it. You sit in the tavern, the noise washing over you. You are safe. You are warm. You are, for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, through the nightmares of the voyage, the weevils, the scurvy. The island begin to feel distant, like a story that happened to someone else. You have survived. You have escaped the famine. You have made it back to the feast. The first few weeks in Port Royal are a hedonistic dream. You spend every coin you earn, and the few you manage to keep from the fishing boat's charity, on the simple luxuries you were denied for so long. You eat until you're sick. You drink until you pass out. You sleep in a real bed, under a real roof, and you wake up every morning with a profound sense of relief that you are not on that ship. You reconnect with a few other survivors from your disastrous voyage. You find them in the taverns, doing the same thing you are, trying to wash away the memory of the hunger with rum and roast pork. You piece together the story of what happened after you were marooned. The ship, with its handful of remaining crew, limped on for another week before being captured by the Spanish. Most of the crew were killed or imprisoned. Only a few escaped, making their way here just as you did. Your doomed voyage is over. Your share of the prize money is zero. You have nothing to show for your ordeal but a collection of fresh scars on your soul. Now, the money is gone. The dream is over, and the harsh reality of your situation sets in. You are broke, unemployed sailor in a town full of them. The odd jobs on the docks are becoming harder to find. The tavern owners who were so friendly when you were buying rounds are now looking at you with impatience. You need a ship. You need to work. And that means you have to make a choice. You could sign on to a merchant vessel. The work is hard, the pay is low, and the discipline is strict. You'd be back to taking orders from captains you despise and officers who look down on you. But the voyages are, for the most part, plain. The ships are generally better supplied. The chances of descending into the kind of hell you just escaped are lower, though never zero. It is a life of drab, predictable safety. Or you could sign on to another pirate ship. You walk down to the harbor, where the masts of the ships form a dense, skeletal forest. You see the black flag flying from the mast of a newly arrived sloop, a sign that they are actively recruiting. Men are gathered at the bottom of the gangplank, listening to the quartermaster lay out the terms. An equal share. A vote for every man. No master but the one you choose. The promise of riches, of freedom, of a short life but a merry one. It's the same song that lured you in the first time. You look at the ship, and you don't see a promise of freedom anymore. You see the cramped quarters, the smoky galley, the locked storeroom. You can almost smell the sour stench of the water casks and the acrid aroma of the salt meat barrel. You can feel the phantom make in your gums and the ghost of hunger in your belly. So why would anyone ever do it again? Why would a man who survived the horrors of a pirate's diet willingly sign up for another dose? This is one of the great puzzles that historians and psychologists debate. Was it a form of addiction to the adrenaline of the life? Was it that the alternative, a life of wage slavery on a merchant ship, was simply so soul-crushing that even the risk of starvation was preferable? Or was it something simpler, a profound lack of options for many sailors, especially those who were now marked as outlaws? Piracy was the only life available to them. A strange, related bit of lore is the idea of the pirate retirement. The popular image is of pirates burying their treasure and retiring to a life of luxury. The reality was that very few pirates ever got to retire. Most were killed, captured, or died of disease or accident. For those few who did manage to lead the life with some money, blending back into normal society was incredibly difficult. The luckiest ones might buy a small tavern or a plot of land, but they were the rare exception. The idea of a pirate pension plan was a complete fantasy. You stand there, at the edge of the docks, caught between two impossible choices. Behind you is the town, with its fleeting pleasures and its inevitable poverty. In front of you is the ship, with its promise of freedom and its near certainty of suffering. Your mind knows that signing those articles again is a form of madness. It's choosing the nightmare you know over the one you don't. But your heart remembers the thrill of the chase, the bond of the crew before it all fell apart, and the brief, shining moments of being the master of your own destiny. You look at the faces of the men signing on. They are desperate, hopeful, and foolish, just like you were. The quartermaster looks at you, a questioning eyebrow raised. The choice is yours. Go back to the weevils in the rock, or accept a different kind of slow decay on land. What do you do? In the end, you don't make a choice. The choice is made for you. A press gang from a Royal Navy warship, desperate for hands, sweeps through the port. You are in the wrong tavern at the wrong time. There is a brief, violent scuffle, a crack on the head, and you wake up in the hold of a British man-o'-war. You have been pressed into service. You are now a sailor in His Majesty's Navy. There is no vote here. There are no shares. There is only the lash into the command of the captain. The irony is bitter. To escape this very fate, you became a pirate. Now, after surviving starvation, scurvy, and the custom of the sea, you have ended up right where you started, only worse. You are now an experienced sailor, but also a known associate of pirates, a fact that earns you nothing but suspicion and the harshest duties. And the food. The food is exactly the same. The first meal they serve you is a familiar nightmare. A rock-hard biscuit and a lump of greasy salt beef. You look at it, and you have to suppress all of that sounds suspiciously like a sob. You cannot escape it. This diet is your destiny. Years pass. The life is brutal, but it is organized. The ship is cleaner. The discipline is harsher. And the food, while just as disgusting, is more regular. You never starve, but you are never satisfied. You fight in battles not for your own profit, but for the glory of a king you will never meet. You survive. You eventually leave the sea, not with a chest full of gold, but with a small pension in the body that is a permanent record of your ordeal. Your teeth are mostly gone, lost to the long-forgotten scurvy or pulled by a ship's surgeon. Your gums are scarred and receding. You have a sailor's gait, a slight rolling walk that you can't shake. Your body forever accustomed to the pitch of a deck. Your joints ache when the weather turns damp. A souvenir from the scurvy that you will carry to your grave. The diet of a pirate, or any sailor of that era, left an indelible mark on the bodies of those who endured it. The skeletal remains of 18th century sailors found in naval graveyards tell a clear story. They show evidence of healed bone fractures from grueling physical labor, severe dental decay and tooth loss from scurvy and a coarse diet, and signs of chronic malnutrition in their bone density. Their bodies were archives of hardship. You find work as a night watchman in a quiet coastal town. You have a small room, a warm fire, and enough money for simple food. But your relationship with food is forever changed. You eat simply, but you are meticulous about it. You can't stand waste. You find yourself hoarding small bits of bread or cheese, a habit from the days when a crumb was a treasure. You have a small garden where you grow vegetables, and you sometimes just sit and look at them, marveling at the simple miracle of something fresh and green growing from the earth. A peculiar and debated psychological after-effect on long-suffering sailors was the development of strange eating habits, or pica, the craving to eat non-food items. While hard to prove historically, some scholars suggest that the extreme sensory deprivation and nutritional deficiencies could lead men to chew on things like dark rope, sauerkraut, or even tobacco, not for hunger, but for the texture and flavor, however unpleasant. It was a sign of a mind and body pushed far beyond their limits. You sit by your fire at night, the memories washing over you. You remember the taste of the turtle meat on the beach, a moment of pure, animal joy. You remember the flavor of the first piece of bread in Port Royal, a taste of salvation. But you also remember the taste of weevils, the burn of the salt horse, the metallic tang of your own blood in your mouth from scurvy. You remember the hunger, a physical presence, a constant companion on your voyage. You realize the great lie of the pirate story. The adventure wasn't about the fighting or the sailing. The true battle was waged every day in the galleon on the mess deck. It was a relentless war against drought, scarcity, and despair. The ultimate treasure was never gold. It was a full belly. It was surviving to eat the next meal. And that is a victory that you, against all odds, have won. The world outside your small window is quiet now. The sounds of the town have faded away, leaving only the soft, distant murmur of the sea. It's a sound that once meant endless hardship. But now, from the safety of your chair, it is just a gentle rhythm, a soft hum to accompany the crackle of the fire. You can feel the weight of your own blanket, the solid floor beneath your feet, the warmth of the embers on your face. You are no longer on that shifting deck, no longer at the mercy of the wind and the waves. The hunger is gone, a ghost that no longer haunts your waking hours. The fear has receded, leaving behind only the quiet stillness of a long journey finally come to an end. The stories are over. The memories can be put to rest, packed away like old sea charts. Your body is heavy. Your mind is calm. The gentle pull of sleep is stronger now than any ocean current. It's a safe harbor, a quiet cove where no storms can reach you. Let the tide pull you out into the deep, peaceful waters of your dreams. There are no weevils there, no saltors, only the soft, dark comfort of a well-earned rest.